Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here to share with you a special segment, one that's designed just for the holidays that we're dealing with. And these are some very difficult time for some, and for others it's time to celebrate, time to experience the real meaning of the season, as it were. But today I want to talk about something that relates to all people. Whether you're a person of faith or whether you're a person of some belief or no belief at all. And that is, we all experience grief. And we experience grief especially, and it becomes especially difficult around the holidays. So today, in this special segment on Talking Points, I'm going to share with you some important truths about coping with grief through the holidays. Coping with grief through the holidays. Well, what is grief? Grief is the internal feelings that's generated by the loss. In other words, these are things that you feel on the inside. Grief is an emotional trauma resulting from the death of a loved one or an emotional distress that could be the result of divorce or even the breakup of a relationship. So grief is not just the loss of a loved one through death, but it's also the loss of a loved one that may relate to a divorce or breakup. And let me put it this way, that very few people talk about, even the loss of a pet can trigger internal emotions regarding grief. Grief can also be the result of a traumatic event that overwhelms the individual's ability to cope. So it could be maybe a car accident or whatever the case it might be, or or you could be involved in some near-death experience, as it were, or whatever the case it might be, or an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, any of those kinds of things like that can be an overwhelming experience. That traumatic event can be overwhelming. I imagine that with all the various hurricanes that have occurred, in the Gulf of Mexico and in Florida, that those individuals affected that experience a traumatic sense of grief and many times have to have counseling to help them to deal with those overwhelming feelings to cope. Having said that, let me say this, that nothing's wrong with you when you feel that you need to have someone to talk to about your grief. Many times people feel like, well, if I go to a counselor, that means something's wrong with my mind. Well, we go to doctors for checkups, don't we? Annual visits, dentists, and so on and so forth. Sometimes that it's important to be able to deal with those feelings of grief by talking to someone who is a professional or attending a group that can help validate the things that you're going through. So a mental health professional or some grief counselor or whatever the case it might be can be a valued asset to help you to deal with all the feelings of grief and be able to get the kind of validation that will help you to make sense of why you feel what you feel and how to navigate moving forward. Another thing about grief is this: these feelings are unique. They're unique to the individual and they are often uncontrollable. And can, because of these feelings, we feel torn apart or bereaved, as it were. When I say that these feelings are unique, that means it's unique to you. No one is going to experience grief the same way. Everyone experiences grief differently. And sometimes those overwhelming feelings of grief can become uncontrollable. Maybe you hear a song, or maybe you can't stand Christmas music right about now. Or maybe you can't, familiar smells. All of these things become things that may move you to the point to where you can't hold back the tears and you can't stop the way you feel the way you feel. These feelings have you at a place where you are torn apart. And so grief is unique and individualistic, and as I said, uncontrollable at many times. Well, what is mourning? Now, oftentimes we find that the word grief and mourning are, a substitute one for the other, but there is a subtle difference between grief and mourning. Mourning is the external expression of our loss. These expressions of mourning are influenced by one's social environment or culture and are controllable. So the external expressions of loss are oftentimes controllable, and it is cultural. It's influenced by the environment. For example, you find in some faith traditions that when they've experienced the loss, maybe as of a pastor, that what they would do is that they would take some form of, they would put a black cloth over the pastor's pulpit chair for 30 days as a way of showing that the church is in outward mourning for this loss that they have experienced. Mourning takes on an internal grief and externalizes it in some form of action, symbol, or ceremony or ritual that activates social support. And that's kind of what I've already alluded toward in regards to the black cloth placed over the pastor's chair, or we go to a funeral, which is one of those outward expressions of mourning. And generally we wear black. Or if this person was a soldier, there are certain things that may occur, or a veteran that may occur at the graveside that may not occur at any other graveside of someone that's lost, like the 21 gun salute or the folding of the flag. All of these are external expressions by some action or symbol or ritual that activates social support. So everyone gets around that or gets behind that and supports that individual or group of individuals at this very special time. Mourning is part and parcel of the grief process. Mourning is part and parcel of the grief process, and often they go hand in hand. In fact, sometimes mourning picks up where grief started. But whatever the case might be, mourning will always find some way to weave itself into the process. Because when anniversaries come around and special events during the year, and that loved one is missing from that important event, sometimes what people do in order to address and express their mourning is maybe like they do in the military, is they have a place setting at the table for that missing individual. Or maybe they'll visit the graveside, or maybe they'll buy a plant, or wherever the case it might be. Or maybe they have a time together as a family where each of them have the opportunity to share how important that person was to the value and the meaning of their life. So mourning is part and parcel of the grief process. Holidays are tough for the griever. In fact, holidays are rough as well as tough for the griever, because holidays are a traditional time of joy and laughter, sparkle and glitter, sharing and gift giving. But for people who are grieving, the holidays seem inappropriate, affronting, and painful. For people who are grieving, the holidays may seem inappropriate, affronting, and painful. Well, here's some things you need to understand about yourself, especially during the holidays when you're trying to cope with these feelings of grief. During the holidays, you may not want to engage with others. That is, going to parties, celebrating, or even putting up decorations. This response is normal and natural. And so often, and that's something to be understood because, you're used to doing certain things around the holidays, but this holiday, I'm not feeling it. And it's okay for you to be honest with how you feel. And whatever way you're feeling during this holiday with the absence of your loved one is natural and normal. In fact, you have to tell yourself and remind yourself that what I'm feeling right now, it's okay. I don't need to apologize for what I feel right now because what I feel right now, it's okay. So that's one of the things that we are engaged with when we are grieving in the holidays. You may not want to do these things, but know that whatever you're feeling at this very devastating time is normal and natural. Another thing you need to understand about yourself, especially during the holidays, you may become easily triggered by seeing others happy and celebrating, which can make you have feelings of resentment and anger. In other words, you don't want to go out and go do any holiday shopping because someone important from your family is not there. And when you see others happy, celebrating their families, you become triggered by it. And you may become resentful and even anger, especially if they're your neighbor or somebody that's your friend and you see them going and you see them doing these things. In fact, they even may invite you to come and do those things, totally insensitive as to what you're feeling and what you're going through right now because they think that this is what you need. And what you need is not what they're offering. And many times, no matter what the platitudes, no matter what people tell you, it's not any of those things. The person's in a better place, or they got their angel's wings, or whatever metaphor we ascribe to those who transition. You're not dealing with those realities, and none of those kind of statements make you feel better. What you're dealing with is the fact that they're not here. And many times we need to understand that about ourselves. And oftentimes others do not understand that's what we're really dealing with. That is what we're really going through. When I say you become triggered by feelings of resentment and anger, you may direct that anger to the wrong person. You may have anger feelings toward God. God, why have you done this? Why have you done this? Or you may have anger toward the medical profession. They should not be able to caught these things before now. You may have anger toward yourself. I wish I could have, would have, should have. And all of these feelings of anger and resentment turn into guilt. Or you may have anger toward the individual. And now you've left me back here with all these things to deal with. All of these expressions, all of these feelings, all of these emotions are natural and normal and nothing you should apologize for. It's what goes along with what they call grief. Because you're grieving, you will have emotional and physical limits, and you need to respect that. You're not 100%. You may have been able to do all the cooking and all the decorating and all those things, but you may want to tell yourself and others, this Christmas I'm not going to be doing any of those things. I'm just going to go with the flow, as it were. I'm just going to instead of doing the cooking, I may just decide to do the cleaning, or I may just let a lot of things slide. It's important to tell others what you're really feeling, and we're going to get into that. But it's important to know that you can tell others, even if their response is not what they want to hear, because it's really not about them during this time or season. It's really all about you. Acknowledge the fact, as I said, that you're not 100%, and it's okay to tell others that you need time and space to heal. Well, during the holidays, these are some of the things you need to understand about others. And some of these comments I have alluded toward already, but they're worth restating or repeating. Recognize that the grief that you are experiencing, others may not be able to understand how you're feeling. Number one, if someone has never lost a spouse, it's going to be difficult for them to identify what losing a spouse feels like. If one has never lost a mother or a father, it's going to be difficult to identify what it feels like to lose a parent. If no one has never lost a sibling, it's going to be difficult to know what it's like to have lost a brother or a sister. And if no one has never lost a child, it's going to be hard for others to put themselves, to empathize with what you're going through. And so sometimes the best help and the best messengers in the times of grief, especially through the holidays, and not just the holidays, is to find others who've had similar losses so that you can get the validation and the kind of coping skills and tips that they may have come or that you get from being in a group. And that's where group counseling can be very, very beneficial to help you through this time of process. Don't feel embarrassed to have to get counseling, because it's about mental health. It's about your mental health. God wants you well, you want to be well, and others want you to be well too. So whatever it's going to take to heal you, do whatever it takes. In recognizing that the grief you're experiencing, others may not be able to identify with, here's the reason. Because it's not your grief, and it's not theirs. Or rather, I should say, it is your grief and not theirs. It is your grief and not theirs. Because grieving is really all about the individual who's grieving at that particular time. It is not about anybody else except you. Oftentimes, families struggle with how each others grieve, especially when they've lost an important one in their family. Everyone in your family will grieve differently, even when they have lost the same person. And I've seen this over and over again where families have lost an important time, and here come the holidays. Nobody knows what to do. Everybody's edgy. They're snappy at one another. It's the elephant in the room. No one wants to talk about it. And so you find everybody grieving differently. Some people just try to keep busy. Others go into recluse. Others may involve themselves, may even self-medicate. And what families need to understand, because we've all experienced the same loss, each one is going to grieve differently. And each one in a family unit should have compassion and empathy and allow the other to grieve the way that they're grieving. We can't fix grief. So you can't say, well, you ought to be doing this or she ought to be doing that. No, you ought to be doing what you feel like doing, because you have emotional and physical limits. So this is where families can begin to communicate and talk with one another in a time like this, so they understand, hey, we're all feeling the same way. Let's respect how each other feels and support one another through this process. Another thing we need to understand about others is this. Expect to get tired of the empty platitudes, such as, I'm sorry for your loss. Or, as I said before, they're in a better place. Or people not knowing what to say to you. Or people making promises of support they will never keep. You're going to get that. You're going to get the empty platitudes, people not knowing what to say, or people saying or making promises of support they never keep. Anytime you need me, I'll call you. Let's get together. Let's do this. And sometimes you never hear from those individuals. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. There's people that you know, even your own friends, that have said things to you and have made you promises of support, yet you never hear from them again. If they see you, they avoid you. Or if you and couples did things together, you were a couple and you were with these other couples, and because that person is no longer with you, either through death or divorce, they treat you like the plague. They don't empathize with what you're going through. And sometimes those people leave you, kicked to the curb. But let me tell you this. Even though these things happen and will happen to those who are grieving, I believe that goodness and mercy shall follow you. I believe that there's someone always that will step up. And sometimes it's the least likely person that you didn't expect that will step up to the plate, that will be there for you to, console you, to support you, and not try to fix what you're feeling, but be an active listener and be there to just listen. Sometimes people who are grieving don't need anybody to try to tell them or try to correct what they're thinking or feeling. Even if what they're thinking or feeling is irrational or lack of faith or whatever we want to ascribe to that individual. That individual that's grieving has the right to think, has the right to feel, and has the right to express what they're feeling, whether I agree with it or not. My role to help those, and our role to help those who are grieving, is to simply be there for them in a way that validates and supports and not try to correct. Let's talk about a few tips for navigating grief through the holidays. Number one, understand that the work of grief is hard work, and it simply will not evaporate over time. So you find people that just won't deal with it. You find maybe yourself that you don't want to deal with it, but you find out that in the process of time, it doesn't evaporate. It's still there. It still has to be dealt with. Grief can't be fixed. It can only be navigated. Grief can't be fixed. It can only be navigated. Sometimes the feelings of grief come in like a wave. And you need to understand when that wave of feeling comes upon you, it is supposed to happen. So you tell yourself, when you feel that wave of grief keep coming in upon you, this is supposed to happen. And thereby you allow yourself to feel what you're feeling and experience what you're experiencing, not trying to fix it, but allowing it and accepting it, and then it dissipates and it goes away. It may come back, but you have to give yourself the time to feel what you're feeling, not try to duck and dodge it, because all that does is prolong the feeling. Grief is best understood in terms as a process and not a time frame. Oftentimes I hear individuals talk about, wow, you should be over this by now, or why is it taking so long to get through this time? Or, they've been dealing with this for a long time. They ought to move on. You can't move on for something that requires a process. And the process has a different time clock, if I was to ascribe a time clock, for every individual going through it. So just because a person may, in say 3 months, seem like that they've moved on, and another person in 3 years seem like that they're still stuck, doesn't mean that the person that in 3 months is any different than the person in 3 years. It's individualistic, and it's how they are coping, it's how they are dealing with their own process. Respect the other person's process. Respect your friend's process who's grieving at this very special time, and even your own family member. Again, grief is best understood in terms as a process and not a time frame. There's been situations where individuals have come and they said to me, maybe 11 months and many times even 3 years, so look, I need to deal with these feelings of grief. They shouldn't be shamed because it appears like it took a long time for them to come to this point. They should understand that now is a time for them to deal with what they're dealing with. And it's okay, and nobody's going to judge you. So I'm sharing with those who know that somebody's grieving during these holidays, don't judge them. However, support them, validate their feelings, and find out what they need from you, not what you think they need to do. Secondly, realize that this holiday, things are going to be different. You already know that. You've experienced that already or about to experience it. And that you should not be ashamed or apologize for how you feel. In fact, if you decide to go to a party or a celebration, always have a way out. When you decide to go to a party or a celebration, maybe you might want to tell that person, look, if I have to get up and leave, don't take it personal because that's what I'm feeling right now. But and thereby you're letting that person know, look, I may not be able to stay the whole time because I might break down. And me breaking down might affect the mood of the celebration. So always have a way out. Prepare for a way out. Tell people. Maybe you need to tell them that I don't think it'd be in my best interest to come right now. Thanks for inviting me. Maybe on the next one. And so these are the kind of things that we can do to help others. But these are the kind of things we can do to help that person that's grieving through this very difficult time through the holidays. Understand that it takes a while for every family and individual to adjust to the absence of an important love. Number 3, make plans with your family and friends and discuss which activities, experiences, and people that make the holidays special for you. Decide to do a few special things with a few special people. Not everything with everybody. Now that's respecting your limits. That's recognizing right now I need to be with people that are going to support me or not try to quote scripture or try to impose what they think I ought to be doing. You need, in many cases, to be left alone. But what you really need is people to be empathetic enough to ask you, what can I do for you at this special time? Number 4, tell others clearly what you want and need for the holidays. Didn't I just say that? Do not be ashamed or embarrassed to let others know what you want from them in terms of emotional support, help, or even sharing. Unknown expectations generally go unfulfilled and lead to disappointment and bad feelings. In other words, people can't read your mind. And even if they acknowledge the fact that you've had a loss, they still can't read your feelings. Sometimes we have to tell people what we want and what we need during this time. Number 5, this is so vitally important. Be good to yourself during this holiday season. Find some way to be a blessing to yourself during this time. There's going to be some times that you may have some moments of happiness, and you might feel guilty because, What am I happy about because my loved one's not here? It's okay to have moments of happiness. And it's okay to focus on you on this time, in this time. Let me say it again. It's okay that the person who's grieving, it's okay for that griever to focus on themselves. In fact, in many ways, during the time of grief, it's one of the most selfish times that the griever can be towards themselves. And people may feel like, well, they're only thinking about themselves. That's who they need to think about at this time, because that loved one is not here. They're not 100%. So they have to engage in some form of self-care. And self-care leads to self-healing. And self-healing for the griever means they have to pay extra attention to what they need to do for themselves is going to make themselves feel better and help them cope through this very difficult time. So be good to yourself during this holiday season. Find some way to be a blessing to yourself during this very special time. The last thing I want to talk about today are children. Understanding that children grieve too. Remember, anyone old enough to love is old enough to grieve. Do what you can to give children that extra special attention they need in the time of loss. Let them know that you're sad about the death and you would be glad to talk with them about it if and when they want to. Sometimes they may not be ready, but when they're ready, be ready to listen what they have to say. Here are the 4 T's that we can apply to children, especially in the time of their loss. Number 1, touching. Everyone needs to be touched and held. Young children need to be hugged, held, and cuddled. Tears. Crying is a natural process of releasing sadness and other emotions. Let children know that crying is okay. By allowing yourself to cry in front of your children, it grants them permission to do likewise, and mutually you have the opportunity to comfort one another. Talking. Talking about the loved one is especially helpful. Listen to them attentively, validate their feelings, answer their questions simply and honestly, and encourage them to share special memories about their loved one. And lastly, traditions. Now, we all know that children need to feel comfortable and secure during the holiday. And that's especially important for children who may have lost a parent or sibling or an uncle or a grandmother or grandfather during this time. They need to feel comfortable. So as a family, you want to try to keep as many of those family traditions as possible and create new ones. A family tradition does not have to remain exactly as it was in the past. We can choose to modify and preserve the special meaning of this time. Well, this concludes this special segment for those who are listening, coping with grief through the holidays. I trust that you've heard something practical that you can employ, or you've heard something that validates exactly where you're at. And if you'd like to know some more or like to have access to other resources, here on this last page are some resources for grievers. You can go to Dr. Alan Wolfeld, his centerforloss.com. Regarding children, the National Association for Grieving Children, childrengrieve.org. It even has resources in your own city that you can connect with, or other kind of books that are designed to help you to kind of be there for the child. Or here's a book that's called Finding Your Way Through Grief, A Guide for the First Year, the second edition by Marty Tusley. If you'd like to purchase a copy of this book, you can go and visit hov.org publications and click on online store. And lastly, Grieving in the Context of Faith by Dr. Stephen E. Gardner. You can go to my website, drstephengardner.com, go to the YouTube playlist and select Talking Points with Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, number 109, and do a special segment there on grieving in the context of faith, designed for those who are faith followers, especially within the Christian tradition. May God bless you. And remember, Jesus is the reason for this season. And whatever you celebrate, make sure that those who are grieving, that you be there for them. God bless you. We'll talk to you again soon on Talking Points with Dr. Stephen E. Gardner. God bless you.